North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in have met at the border truce village of Panmunjom in the demilitarized zone. The two leaders also shook hands and walked the red carpet. The talks are underway at the Peace House, where the two leaders are in fact discussing a range of issues, including North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Now, Kim Jong-un is of course the first North Korean leader to set foot in South Korea since the 1950 Korean War. Now, before the formal talks, Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in also held a closed-door meeting at the Peace House. Now, the United Nations chief Antonio Guterres has also spoken in support of the mega talks, expressing hope of resolution to the long-pending issues, including the denuclearization of North Korea. Now, the historic meet between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in comes following a series of back-channel talks between North and South Korean officials. The North Korean side comprises of a 9-member delegation, which includes Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong. Now, after the official welcoming ceremony, both the nation's delegates will meet at the Peace House. If there is an agreement after the talks, it will be announced in the evening, but no time has so far been set for that. The security has also been tightened at the inter-Korean border ahead of the high-profile talks, which come in more than a decade. As many as 2,800 journalists have also registered at the main press center for the summit, and this is for the first time that the two Koreas are in fact holding talks in almost over a decade. The relations between the two nations have been extremely frosty since the 1950 Korean War. Now, the inter-Korean summit is also expected to set the stage for a meeting between United States President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in the coming months. Meanwhile, White House has also issued a statement on the inter-Korean summit expressing hope that talks will achieve progress towards a future of peace and prosperity for the entire Korean peninsula. All right, now for more on this, we are joined in by our correspondent Ramesh Ramachandran, who's been tracking all the developments for us very, very closely from the South Korean capital of Seoul. Ramesh, this is of course a historic meeting between the leaders of North and South Korea. What is expected to come of it by the end of today?
Well, we don't know for a fact whether there will be an outcome declaration or a joint statement towards the end of the Moon Jae-in Kim Jong-un talks. But the expectation here is that there will be some formulation in the wording of the statement which might reflect the intention of the North Korean government led by Kim Jong-un to declare its commitment towards achieving denuclearization. Now, that's a key demand from the South Korean side and the US side, that Kim Jong-un must express his commitment to working towards complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization. But that said, it's still a moot point. The talks are still happening as we speak. They've begun the talks about half an hour ago, and it's still continuing till the lunch break at about 12 noon. So we have to wait and watch for the outcome of those talks. But yes, denuclearization is high on the agenda of the talks, as also the issue of unification and the inter-Korean relations, including the issue of unifying the families divided by the 53 war.
Right.
And before I continue any further, Mohammed, I have a journalist friend with me. His name is Martin. He comes from France. And I want to begin by asking you, Martin, about your thoughts about the historic visual we saw just moments ago of Kim Jong-un setting foot inside South Korean soil and shaking hands with Moon Jae-in. Your thoughts?
Well, I think you summed it up perfectly. This is a history in the making. I was talking to South Korean and South Korean journalists here, and they are telling us that it's an image that they did not expect to see. I think that everyone here has been waiting for this in a long time, and once again, this is history in the making.
And you think Kim Jong-un has got the optics of the summit correct, in the sense that he has announced a number of confidence-building measures in the run-up to the summit, and also we saw him trying to build a personal rapport, so to speak, with Moon Jae-in. So do you think that will hold them in good stead going forward?
Well, I think that the person or the journalist who is able to read Kim Jong-un's mind, I would like to shake that man's hand. But I think that definitely there is a show here that says to the world, I'm open to discussions, I'm open to negotiations, and we will see where it leads.
And what should the world expect going forward from the much anticipated summit meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un?
Well, I think that's what everyone is looking forward. Of course, this summit is very important, especially regarding the past between the two Koreas. But I was talking to an American journalist a few minutes ago from the Washington Post, saying that it's definitely a step towards the big meeting that is going to happen between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. What is going to happen from it, we don't know. Donald Trump was calling Kim Jong-un little rocket man and promising him fire and fury a few months ago. So from there we've come to a possible meeting in the coming weeks. I guess we'll see.
One last question, since you mentioned about Kim Jong-un's personality. Now, how is Europe seeing Kim Jong-un? Does Europe see him as necessarily as a mad person, or do you think there is a method in his madness?
I can't really talk on behalf of Europe, to be honest. I think that he's an unpredictable leader. But I think everyone could tell you that. I don't know. I don't know. That's the most honest answer I can tell you. I do not know how to read Kim Jong-un's mind. I guess that we will see from today and from his further meetings, and probably with Donald Trump, what comes out and what his actual agenda is here.
Right. On that note, Martin, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries.
So there you heard it from a French journalist. He says it's very difficult to read Kim Jong-un's mind, and aptly so, because he is one unpredictable politician, temperamental, some would say, reckless, rash and brash. So one has to wait and watch for the final outcome of the Inter-Korean summit happening as we speak between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in.
Absolutely indeed, Ramesh. And just to dwell a little bit more in terms of the personality of Kim Jong-un, the fact of the matter is, since the month of January onwards, he's made some significant concessions. He's actually the one who's being seen as the one who's trying to reach out. And that is what has resulted in this meeting with the South Koreans and also the potential meet with Donald Trump. How do you view that?
Well, Mohammed, as Martin was mentioning just moments ago, it's very difficult to read Kim Jong-un's mind and what are the motivations for him to actually enter into dialogue with both South Korea and the US. Now, there are two possible interpretation explanations. One, that the sanctions are beginning to bite on him and his regime. The second issue is that the North Korean side has mastered or completed its nuclear weapons cycle. It has the nuclear weapon capability, the technology to go with it, and therefore it does not see any further need for conducting more tests. So clearly he has his work cut out for it. It remains to be seen where it all ends up going forward, especially the forthcoming meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un. So as things stand today, the talks are very delicately poised. And where will they go from here is anybody's, it's a million-dollar question really, Mohammed.
Absolutely. So what is the motivation for Kim Jong-un to actually be reaching out and be a part of these talks? We'll be discussing just a bit more on that. Ramesh, do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, let's also take a look at the tensions on the Korean Peninsula, which is not just about the Kim's regime's nuclear capabilities. The disputes between North and South go at least 60 years back, when the two nations had fought the Korean War. Ramesh Ramachandran, of course, decodes the relationship in this report. Take a look.
Now, if I were to take you back in history, back in time to the year 2000, when the first Inter-Korean summit took place in Pyongyang between the then South Korean President Kim Dae-jong and Kim Jong-un's late father, Kim Jong-il. That was the first Inter-Korean summit in the year 2000. Now, the second Inter-Korean summit was held again in Pyongyang in the year 2007, again between Kim Jong-il and the then South Korean President Roh Moo-hyun. Top of the agenda is the issue of denuclearization. Now, North Korea says it is committed to pursuing global disarmament, but it is not willing to commit just yet to removing or giving up its nuclear weapons, because Kim Jong-un says he sees nuclear weapons as an insurance policy, as a means of defense and deterrence against the designs of the US and its allies in the region and beyond. South Korea, on the other hand, and the US included, insist that North Korea must go in for a complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization. That's where things stand at the moment. The second issue is that of ending the 65-year-old war and going for a peace treaty between the South and the North. Remember, technically, North Korea and South Korea even today are at war. The armistice was signed in '53, but since then, there's been no formal peace treaty between the two countries. The third issue is inter-Korean relations, especially unification of the Korean Peninsula, of the North and the South, the issue of removing or minimizing the number of military guard posts along the DMZ, removing the loudspeakers used for propaganda by both sides, by both North Korea and South Korea, and also the issue of reuniting families divided by the 53 war. So these are the issues on the agenda of Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un when they meet for the third Inter-Korean summit. Now, after the third Inter-Korean summit, all eyes will be on the much anticipated big-ticket summit meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Now, we do not know the location or the date of that meeting just yet, but there are speculation doing the rounds of 4 possible locations. 1, Sweden, 2, Switzerland, 3, Mongolia, and 4th, some country in Southeast Asia. If you're wondering why Sweden or Switzerland, well, Sweden and Switzerland are 2 members or remaining members of the Neutral Nations Commission, which was formed after the armistice was signed in '53 between the 2 warring sides. Since then, Poland and Czechoslovakia, now Czech Republic, have moved out of the Neutral Nations Commission. That leaves us with Sweden and Switzerland as the 2 possible locations for the Trump-Kim meeting.
All right, so that was a report that was filed by Ramesh Ramachandran as to where Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump could potentially meet if and when their meeting takes place. And meanwhile, is still live with us from Seoul, from where he's tracking all the latest developments. Now, Ramesh, we were talking about the motivation as to why Kim Jong-un would be so interested in these talks. It's possible that the sanctions could in fact be having their bite. It's also possible that North Korea could have mastered the technology for producing nuclear weapons and therefore do not feel that they need to in fact conduct any further nuclear test, and thereby they'd like to normalize their relationship with the rest of the world. The big question, of course, in all of this is China. Will China intend to see a Korean peninsula without conflict? Will it work in China's favor?
Absolutely. That's the regional dimension to the Korean crisis, really, Mohammed. Both Japan and China are watching these developments very, very closely. Now, Japan has an outstanding issue with North Korea in the fact that it accuses North Korea actually of abducting many of its nationals about 2 or more decades ago. And that is an outstanding issue for Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Shinzo Abe has spoken with Moon Jae-in in the last couple of days, and he has expressed a desire to watch closely for the outcome of the Inter-Korean summit and the Trump-Kim meeting before he decides on his next course of action, whether to go in for Japan-North Korea talks or revive the 6-party talks that discussed the North Korean crisis not so long ago. So Japan is invested heavily in what is happening now as we speak in Panmunjom village. Talking about China now, Mohammed, China is the big player in the region. It has been handling the North Korean affairs for some time now. And we saw Kim Jong-un travel with his wife, Ri Sol-ju, on the train to Beijing and meeting Xi Jinping in Beijing, discussing the prospects of peace on the Korean peninsula. So North Korea keeping China very much in the loop as we talk about the Inter-Korean summit. But how China will respond going forward is anybody's guess. But China remains invested in North Korea, and that, to my mind, will play out in a proxy fight, so to speak, between the US and China over North Korea, who will be able to wean North Korea away from its nuclear weapons program. That is the big question to watch out for, Mohammed.
Absolutely, indeed. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Ramesh Ramachandran, for joining us and getting us all those latest updates from Seoul. We'll, of course, keep coming back to you as the developments take place in this historic meeting between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in. And also the president of South Korea is set to hold the historic talks with North Korea's leader. And although India doesn't have a dog in that fight, it's still watching the developments very closely. With India heavily invested in the Indo-Pacific region, the outcome of the peace talks will have implications for New Delhi as well. Remember, India has embassies in Seoul and also in Pyongyang, putting it in a bit of a unique position to nudge both sides towards peace. The WION's Ramesh Ramachandran reports more on this.
What is India's position on the Korean crisis? Does India have a position at all? I spoke to India's ambassador to South Korea, Vikram Doraiswamy, and began by asking him about the much talked about issue of denuclearization.
While we have a clear position in opposition to North Korea's nuclear and WMD delivery systems programs, We are also not in favor of any sort of precipitate means of getting rid of those weapons.
Now, India has had a long history of association and involvement in Korean affairs since the early 1950s. An Indian diplomat, KPS Menon, chaired the United Nations Commission, which was formed to oversee elections in undivided Korea. And after the Korean War from 1950 to 53, both warring sides accepted a resolution sponsored by India. And after the agreement, the armistice agreement was signed on 27 July 1953, Lieutenant General Themaya came to chair the Neutral Nations Repatriation Commission, which oversaw humanitarian relief operations.
So the dialogue route is obviously the best way forward, and we are, in that sense, supportive of anything positive that might come out of this upcoming series of summits.
The ambassador says proliferation linkages between North Korea and some countries in India's immediate neighborhood, such as Pakistan, are another cause for concern. Listen in.
There is also a third part, which is, of course, that the security challenge, if you will, emerging from North Korea's development and access to technologies relating to weapons of mass destruction and their delivery systems, has a direct connection with our own region. And that proliferation trail has been of great concern to us, and something that makes it more than just a theoretical challenge for us. It is something that has very practical, very direct, very immediate concerns to India.
Remember, India is only a handful of countries which has diplomatic missions both in Seoul and in Pyongyang. And that, as India's Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj told her then-American counterpart Rex Tillerson, may come in handy for the US to keep the channels of communication open between the West and Kim Jong-un. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran in Seoul for WION.